Not to say nothing about it.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see everybody today. I've heard from several of our members that are still not able to be out. And some of our older folks are still not comfortable being out because there's still quite a bit of ice around. But glad to see those of you that are able to be here today. If you would be opening your Bibles to Luke chapter 14. Luke chapter 14. And we're going to start our class this morning in verse 25. Luke chapter 14, verse 25. Don, would you lead our prayer for us this morning?
Our most divine and righteous Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for this beautiful day. Another Lord's Day when we gather together with brothers and sisters of like mind to study Thy Word and to worship Thee, Father, in truth and in spirit. We pray, Father, that all that's done here this day will be in accordance with Thy will and be acceptable unto Thee. Father, we thank Thee for the opportunity we have to come together in occasions such as this to study Thy Word without being molested or made afraid in any way. We do but live in a great country, Father. We pray that Thou will bless this great country that we live in, help it turn back to Thee in obedience. Father, we ask Thee to be with Josh as he leads the class this morning. Help him to have a ready recollection of those things He wishes to impart to us. We ask, Father, that Thou will look down upon us, Thy believing children, with tenderness and mercy and forgiveness of our sins, as we do truly repent of them. These things we ask and give thanks for in Thy Son, our Savior's name.
Amen. Last week at the end of our class, you may remember that I mentioned the fact that all of the things that we had seen thus far in Luke chapter 14 were really an introduction to what we're going to see in the latter part of this chapter. Ultimately, what is going to take place in this last part? Jesus was facing an issue that was not unique just to His day and time. It's an issue that we still see many people struggling with today, and that is the issue of discipleship. There are many people we see, especially in our day and time, who want to wear the name of Christ, but they don't want to do the things that merits. They don't want to do the things that warrants that they are to be doing. Well, we see in the times of Jesus, there were multitudes of people that were always following Him. They were there, they wanted to see the things that He was going to do, they wanted to hear what He had to say. But Jesus understood the fact that there were many of those people that were following Him who were not becoming true disciples, who weren't making the changes in their life that they needed to make, who didn't have their focus the way that it needed to be. And so let's notice verses 25 down through 33. And then let's go back and let's make some comments as to what Jesus is saying in this section. It says, "And there went great multitudes with Him. And He turned and said unto them, If any man come to me, and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first, and counteth the cost, whether he have sufficient to finish it? Lest haply after he hath laid the foundation, and is not able to finish it, all that behold it began to mock him, saying, This man began to build, and was not able to finish. Or what king, going to make war against another king, sitteth not down first, and consulteth whether he be able with 10,000 to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is yet a great way off, he sendeth an ambassage, and desireth conditions of peace. So likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple." So looking at this passage in Luke 14, 25 through 33, Jesus knew that many of these people that were following Him were not willing to go that extra mile. They were not willing to do what was expected of them in order to be His disciple. They simply wanted to fall in with the crowd. They wanted to go along and see what was going to happen. And so Jesus turns to them and He presents some pretty strong language. I mean, regardless of what era of history that we are reading this passage of Scripture with the mindset of, this language is one that is very strong. Because notice He uses a word here that maybe in our day and time has a much stronger connotation than it did in the first century. Notice He says that any person who is not willing to hate. Now, typically, whenever we use the word hate, what do we mean? It's something that we dislike severely. It's something that we despise, that we want nothing to do with. So is Jesus saying that if we're going to be a Christian, we have to despise and dislike our parents? We have to despise and dislike our spouse? No. We have to despise and mistreat our children and not be loving toward them? No, that's not what He's saying at all. Because when you go back into the Hebrew language, the word that we see here translated as hate literally means love less. It doesn't mean hate in the sense as we think of the word hate. It literally means that you are to love them less than you love something else. Well, in this illustration, what is He saying? He says you must love everybody and everything else less than you love me. Well, does that not still ring true today? Jesus is still to be in that place of prominence in our life. We are not to allow anyone or anything to come into that position in our own lives. Well, Jesus knew that there were people that were following Him that did not have those kinds of feelings toward Him. But whenever we look at this term, hate, I want to give you a couple of other examples of passages that we find this term being used. If you look in Romans chapter 9, we find a quote there that Paul uses from Malachi chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. Where it says, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. This is God speaking. Is God literally saying in this passage that He despises Esau? Is He literally saying that He has an intense hatred toward him? No. But what He is saying is that Jacob was more favored. Jacob was doing the things that were more in line with the will of God. And so God was viewing him with more favor. Simply put, Esau was less loved because of his rebellion, and Jacob was more loved because of his faithfulness. But what Jesus is saying is that we cannot put anyone, parents, spouse, children, friends, we cannot put anyone before Christ. Well, in regard to our own life, anyone that is not willing to take up his cross daily and follow Jesus, anyone that is not willing each and every day of their life to do what is expected of them, then that person is not a true disciple of Jesus Christ. And I think this subject is one that we don't talk about enough. Discipleship is something that is so crucial to our salvation. Because if we do not move past that elementary state and get into where we can handle the meat of the Word, and we start allowing our lives to be transformed by the Word, and we become true disciples of Christ, then folks, we're going to fall away. We're going to lose our salvation. We're not going to be as devoted to God as He wants us to be. Because as children of God, each and every day that we live, from the time that we come up out of the waters of baptism, our life is to be changing daily. And maybe I should use a different term there. Our life is to be transforming daily as we become more like Christ. And that's the point that Jesus is trying to get across with those who are following Him. He says, if you're not willing to watch me and pattern yourself after what you see in me, if you're not willing to go along with the things that I'm teaching, then you cannot be my disciple. Simply put, he basically is saying, if you're not willing to do this, you're wasting your time. Go home. Go back to your career. Go back to whatever it is that you have forsaken to come and follow me, if you're not willing to give your all.
You know, Jesus gave the big picture, and I can't believe I can't remember where it is. Maybe you could, where, the greatest commandment and the second is likened unto it. And he gave us a picture, the big picture is what I call it, of what it's all about. All the law and the prophets, he says, hangs on these two. And we're to learn to love God most of all.
That's right.
And we get to that point where nothing else compares to our love for God, then we've achieved where we want to go with our hearts.
That's right.
But I don't know that we think about that enough. I don't.
I agree. Yes, sir.
In relationship to what he's saying here, Galatians 5, he says the whole law is fulfilled in one statement: love thy neighbor as thy neighbor as thyself.
That's right. And really what that all boils down to is if we love God the way we're supposed to, then we're going to honor Him and we're going to serve Him. If we love our fellow man the way that we're supposed to, we're going to treat them right. We're going to engage with them in ways that are appropriate. And that's why the New Testament stresses love so much. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 says, if we don't have love, we have nothing. I mean, it doesn't matter what we're doing. It doesn't matter how good we are. If we don't have that true, genuine love for God and for our fellow man, we have nothing.
There's only one way to know whether we love God and our fellow man, and that's through what we do.
That's right. Well, what did Jesus say? If you love me, keep my commandments. There you go. And the way that we show our love one for another. Jesus said, by this shall they know that you are my disciples indeed. There's that word disciple again. If you have love one for another. And so, in my opinion, I think this concept of discipleship is one that we really need to stress much more. Because it's something that is so crucial in our spiritual lives. But so often what happens is we place all of our attention on the front end. We put all of our attention, all of our focus upon getting people into the baptistry. Once we get them into the baptistry, once we get them baptized, we think our job's over. But really, our job's just beginning. That's why we see in the Great Commission that it is a threefold mission. We are to go and teach. That's the first. We're to baptize. And then we are to teach to observe all things. That's where discipleship comes in.
And as a church, this is my opinion, that's why we lose so many new converts. We fail to follow up and offer help, give help to that young. A lot of folks won't ask for help, but there's ways of giving help even when they haven't asked for it.
That's right.
And I believe we lose a lot of new converts because of our lack.
And I agree. I do. And it's one of those things that we have to continue coming back to this concept of love. We have to continue to show love. We have to continue to show understanding. No, they're not going to get everything right. Yes, they're still going to make mistakes. They're still learning. They are still babes in Christ.
Fellowship.
Do we correct our child one time and then quit? No. I wish we could. But no, we continue to correct our children. We continue to teach and instruct them for as long as it takes. Well, that's that transformation. As they grow and mature in their faith, they will be transformed into disciples of Christ. But we have too many people today that are satisfied with being Christians in name only.
Can you be that? I know they try, but can you?
They try. They try. They call themselves that. But are you really a Christian? No. Because if you're not doing what is expected of you, then you're not a child of God. You're not faithful to God. Well, notice the examples that Jesus gives. He starts out talking about a man that builds a tower. And in this, he's talking about a man ultimately that is building a fence around his home and building watchtowers there. Now, in those days, that was something that was very common. Oftentimes, especially those who were very wealthy, they would build towers so that they could keep enemies out, so they could keep beggars out. We think of the example of the rich man and Lazarus. It talks about Lazarus being laid at the rich man's gate, the gates of the walls that are around that house. Well, oftentimes also, they would have their servants who would stand guard, and they would build towers. Well, notice what it says. It says, who sets about to do something like that without first stopping to consider all of the ramifications? The example that he uses here, he said, which one starts a building project without first determining if they have enough money to finish it? Now, I know sometimes that does happen. Sometimes there are circumstances that come up that cause certain projects not to be completed. But what this is saying is who is it that would go out and would just start building something without thinking about the end result, without thinking of what is going to come about? Well, look at what Jesus is trying to show us here. He says these people have come along, they're following me, but they're not thinking about what is going to be expected of them. They're not thinking about what's down the line. They're thinking just about the here and now. Well, coming back to something that we mentioned just a while ago. How many times have we seen those who will come forward and express that they want to be baptized into Christ, and possibly the reason they're doing that is only because their emotions have been stirred, or because something has been said that makes them think this is something they need to do, but they don't really understand what they're doing? I think that's something that happens quite regularly, quite frequently. Now, it is not up to us, at least in my opinion, it's not up to us to become a detective agency and try to interrogate those people and find out if they are really where they need to be, because the Scriptures tell us that if there are still things they don't know, then we teach them to observe those things after they're baptized. But ultimately, in order to be baptized into Christ, they need to understand that that is for the remission of sins. Now, coming back to this example, here were individuals that were following Jesus, but they weren't thinking about the long haul. They weren't thinking about what all was going to be expected of them. And like Don said, there are many people who fall away either because they are neglected in the early days of being a Christian, or they fall away because their eyes are finally open to what all is expected. How many times have we seen those who will start coming to services, who'll be baptized, but then when we start studying with them and they start realizing, well, I can't engage in these behaviors. I can't have this relationship. I can't do this. I can't do that. Rather than lay those things aside in order to become a disciple of Christ, they stay devoted to those things and they fall away. This is why it is so crucial that we teach, that we encourage, that we show them the truth. But then Jesus gives us another example. He gives us the example of a king. He said, what king is there who is thinking about going to war with another king who does not first consider what he's going up against? This king is going to want to know how many soldiers there are, what kind of weapons they have, what kind of fortresses, what types of barriers they have in place. What all am I going to be coming up against? But he said, here's a king that just goes into battle. He said, and then when he gets there and he sees what he's up against, he suddenly wants to make peace. He suddenly wants to find some way out of this. He wasn't prepared. He didn't have all of the knowledge that he needed. But we see another phrase here. Notice verse 33. Jesus says, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath. Another translation says, one who is not willing to renounce all that he has. This does not mean that we have to abandon everything that we have. It does not mean that we have to give up all of the relationships in life we have. It does not mean that we have to give up possessions. It does not mean that we have to give up all these things. But we have to give up those things in the position of prominence. We have to move those things down a notch in priority in our life and put Jesus in that place. But sadly, for many people, they're not willing to do this. For many people, being a Christian really doesn't mean all that much to them. For many people, being a Christian simply means that you do just enough to feel good in your spirit. You do just enough to make you think that you're doing okay and you're going to heaven. But it's so much more. There's an old song that we used to sing that I've not heard in a long time. But it says, He is my everything, He is my all. Is that really the attitude that we have about Christ? It should be. It must be. If we're going to be His disciple. He has to be our everything and our all. Any questions or comments on that section of verses? That's a good way of putting it, yes. We surrender to His will unconditionally. And sometimes we may not like the things we have to give up. We may not, at least from the outset, especially someone that's just coming out of the world, their eyes may not be open as to why they have to give those things up. But if we're going to be children of God, as Jared said, we have to come to that point that we unconditionally surrender to His will. We do what He says. Any other questions or comments?
That's why it seems to me, and statistics prove it out, the older we get, the harder it is for us to do that, to give up and to submit and to understand that our lives up to that point has been a failure. Because our lives are failures if we're not Christians.
Right.
All that we gain is not. But the older we get, that's why He said, forget not the Lord in the days of thy youth. That's why these young people are extra important to us.
That's right. Well, we hear the old adage, we say someone's old and set in their ways. And that's where it comes from. I mean, the longer that we live with a certain mentality, the harder it is to change that. Carrie, do you have something to say?
I've thought many times when people come forward, and you can't help, do they know really what they're committing to? And that's, here it tells us we need to count the cost.
That's right.
And do they understand what they're really saying they'll do? Have they counted it? Do they understand that they're really forsaking all or surrendering all, as Jared said, for the rest of their life? It's a huge commitment.
It is, and it's one of those situations to where when I'm confronted with a situation to where maybe I don't know a person very well or I've not had an opportunity to visit with them, I'll try to take a little bit more time talking with them, making sure they understand. But does anybody really understand fully? I mean, does anybody really understand what all is involved in the Christian life when they first become a Christian? I don't think they do. Because that's part of growing. That's part of teaching them to observe. And also, I mean, if we look at it from the standpoint of, like I mentioned earlier, the concept of babes in Christ versus those who are mature, I mean, those who are babes in Christ, there's things that they cannot understand. There are things that they cannot digest. And so that's why I made the statement that in order for someone to be baptized into Christ, all they really need to understand at that point is that they're a sinner and they need salvation, and that the blood of Christ is what takes their sins away. And then from that point, then we begin to teach. We go from that point, because it could get to the point that we start putting requirements on salvation that aren't there.
But isn't this passage teaching we are to count the cost?
We should count the cost, yes. And that's why I believe if, like I said, in a situation where I don't know the individual, I'll talk to him a little bit and I'll say, well, this, you're becoming a Christian, and I'll go a little bit more in depth with someone like that. But if it's someone that has been raised in the church, that has a knowledge of what is taking place, they should have already counted the cost before they made that decision. And so there's a lot of different variables that we look at depending upon the situation. But yes, that is what Jesus is trying to get across, is that we need to consider the decisions that we're making. And I've always been a firm believer that regardless of what the decision is, whether if it's a spiritual matter or a secular matter, whatever it is, we need to count the cost of that decision before we make it. Because a lot of times people get themselves into trouble, get themselves into situations that they can't get themselves out of very easily because they don't count the cost.
As a preacher, though, when you've offered invitation, how many times during that offering of the invitation have you included this? There's no telling how many invitations and carries that I've offered, he's offered, you've offered. And I doubt that very many of them have this. We don't understand this. This is part of the teaching we're going to have.
I agree.
And there's a lot of people think when a person comes up out of that water of baptism, they've forgotten all those things they liked before. But I can say the night I was baptized, when I was raised up out of that water, I still had some likes and things that I had to overcome.
Oh, that's true. Absolutely.
But we forget that sometimes. I've heard people say, well, once they're baptized, all those sinful things they were doing, it's not true.
That's right.
And it takes a lot of teaching. It took a lot on Carol's part and other Christians to help me to understand that.
And she's still working on it, right?
She's still working on it. Thank you, Lord.
But no, that is true. And, there are so many of these things, like we've looked at today with discipleship and with counting the cost. We need to stress those things more. Because, like I said, I think a lot of times our mentality is we focus on getting them baptized. If we get them and our mentality is if we can get them baptized, then we'll have opportunity to teach them later. Well, we might not. We might not.
That's where fellowship. Yeah, people say, well, what is going visiting, and what does that have to mean? Or how great a thing is that? When members of the church go visit new members of the church, it means a great deal.
Yes, it does.
Now,
It does.
For myself now, even though I was married to a Christian, it meant a lot to me when some of those from Breakville came and visited me and talked to me.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm that much different. Maybe in some ways I'm different, but not that.
Well, one thing that I've always thought is very important, and I know in the past the congregation here at Pyburn Street has had this and done this, but I think it's very important whenever you have young Christians that you set aside some class time. You have an older Christian man. You have someone that kind of takes them under their wing and instructs them and helps them, kind of like a new converts class or something like that. I can remember when I was growing up, and I've shared this with some of you in the past, growing up out here at Burdell, we had about 5 or 6 teenage boys that were all about the same age, and we were all baptized around the same time. Well, they had my uncle, Jim Menard, they had him take us all into a class, and we spent probably about 6 months or so, and he went over a lot of the fundamentals of the faith, and he talked about how you take an active role in worship services. And at the end of that period, the elders at the time, they came into the class one day, and they said, well, starting right now, said the first Sunday of every month, you boys are in charge of the worship service. And they said, our only stipulation is we want each one of you to participate or to lead each act of worship at least once. And so every one of us took our turn preaching. Every one of us took our turn leading singing. Every one of us took our turn serving the Lord's Supper. And it turned into a cycle that we did every first Sunday of the month for several years. And 2 of us are still preaching every Sunday. One is Timothy Wells that still preaches out at Burdell. And so it's one of those things that I think it's so important. And I know in the past this concept of mentorship has been abused in some places. But I think it's something that is so important whenever you have a new Christian, that someone takes them under their wing and encourages them and teaches them and guides them, even if just by the example that you set, that you take that opportunity to be there for that person. Any other questions or comments? All right, we're going to stop right there. Lord willing, next Sunday morning we'll pick up in Luke chapter 15 and verse 1.